Nick, Nick Shafford. And Nick has over 50 years of the varied work experience, including senior general management and the finance roles. From 1989 to 2017, he ran his own management consulting and professional development company. Currently, he is officially retired, but still spends time on research and writing. He is the past chair of the Professional Standards Committee of the International Council of Management Consulting Institute and led the development of the competency model for CMC certification in over 50 global CMC institutes. He is also a member of the Mensa. Nick is a member of the Working Group 2, the Metrics, the Working Group of ISO TC 260. He believes that human capital is the untapped frontier of the competitive advantage and the value creation, but is poorly understood in the reporting. Thank you, and over to you, Nick.
Great, thanks, Sahid. It's again a pleasure to be with everybody on this group, and it's been a pleasure to actually work with everybody on this group. So there's a lot of work that's gone on behind the scenes here, and I think there's a lot of like minds. So as Sahid said, I have over 50 years of experience in both financial and general management, and 30 years in consulting and training. My sort of major interest and my passion is in organizational culture. And as you can see, the subtitle of the book is essentially not only the workplace battlefield, but where great talent goes to die. And I'm picking up on both on Solange's comments and on Jeff's comments. One of the problems with lack of disclosure is that organizations go out and spend a lot of money on talent and bring it into the organization. And what we really need to understand is how well are they creating an environment within that organization where the talent can be optimized, because people are the greatest asset, as Solange said. But in some cases, they don't have the opportunity to work at their best because the organization isn't creating a positive environment, and we're seeing high turnover and things like that. So my passion is, as I say, organizational culture. So that leads us to our question, well, how does my work link to ISO 30414? And the answer is what Jeff talked about, which is you need to know what's going on with your people. People are not only your greatest asset, you spend your largest amount of money typically on people. And as again, Solange said, we need to move from thinking away as people as a cost to the organization, where we're trying to drive the cost down, to people as an investment in the organization. Next slide. Or have I got it? Yeah, I think we're missing a few bits on here. So what are the 11 areas of disclosure in ISO 314? We were talking about this, Sabrina touched on the fact that we contain a number of different metrics. And if you look at the standard, in section 4.7.1, there's a table, table 2, which I don't know if you hit the slide again, Zahid, whether the table will come up. Yes, there we go. Thank you. So table 2, which is in section 4.7.1, actually demonstrates the specifics that some of the other talkers have been mentioning. Again, Sabrina touched on the fact of large organizations, small organizations, internal and external measures. So the human capital areas, the categories, is that left-hand column there, and the metrics come in the second column. So each of the 11 metrics are explained in the following paragraphs in the standard, 4.7.2 through 4.7.12. And very helpfully, I think, there are real-life case study examples shown in the annex to the guideline as well. So not only can you see what the suggested metrics are, you can see examples of both how they're calculated and how they can actually be applied in practice. One other thing to remember, it's not just ISO 30414 that we're talking about here. This is the core document, which contains the main metrics. But in support of these metrics, there are also a number of ISO guidelines, which our working groups have been developing, which are technical specifications around specific areas of these metrics. So, for example, there's a technical specification on how to develop the culture metrics in much more detail. There's a technical specification that only just came out a couple of months ago on the very topical area of employee engagement metrics. So there is a wealth of information, not only in suggested sort of high-level metrics, but on how you put these together. Next slide, please. So there are essentially 11 core areas. Let's start with the first one, which is compliance and metrics. There are 5 metrics suggested in compliance metrics. I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but this deals with some high-level things like tracking grievances, discipline issues, disputes, and the results of audits, and all related to human capital, obviously. The second one is a group of items around costs, human resources costs. And again, they talk about things like total workforce costs. One of the things Solange touched on is one of the SEC things that the US is trying to get disclosure on is total workforce costs, because for many organizations, looking at many people's annual accounts, you can't even see that information. And to try and assess human capital performance without understanding how much the organization is actually spending on its workforce is extremely difficult. So not only are some of the regulations moving in that direction, some of them already require this, but this particular ISO guideline does include it and is one of the suggested areas. The third one is obviously a very well-known area, diversity and inclusion. Covers key areas, age, gender, disability, many things like that. And again, I re-emphasize here that many of these things are very consistent with the emerging requirements that are coming out of various governmental bodies and regulatory bodies in terms of greater disclosure, underpinning what Jeff was talking about, a lot of the whole area of ESG metrics around the social area. The fourth category is in leadership. Leadership here, essentially, we're talking about very important issues like the measuring trust, span of control, and leadership development. The next one, organizational culture, certainly an area that I was particularly concerned about. A couple of measures in organizational culture, mainly the area of employee engagement, satisfaction, and commitment, as well as retention rate, which is another critical area. The last one on this slide being health, safety, and well-being. Again, emphasize that this is very much aligned with and consistent with health and safety reporting that's already required in many jurisdictions. So what we've tried to do is to make sure that there is an accommodation, if you like, of the things which are normal practice in many jurisdictions and areas that we're moving towards. So again, as I say, these consistent with areas like ISO 45001, which is focused around the health and safety area. Next slide, please. The next one is the whole area of productivity measurements. This very much deals with some of the traditional measures of human capital in terms of overall system performance reporting. Obviously, one of the key areas we have touched on, some of the speakers touched on earlier, is the human capital return on investment. That falls into this particular category as well. The next one is recruitment. This is fairly large. As you can see, there are 14 metrics in this area, broken down between recruitment, mobility, and employee turnover. Again, turnover, very consistent with greater transparency of what's going on in the organization. The next one is skills and capabilities. Obviously has to do with the total development and training costs of the organization, participation rates, and assessments of workforce competency. Again, absolutely critical if people are driving your value creation, as Solange talked about. We've got to understand how well the organization is doing in terms of developing and retaining the competencies it needs to do that. And succession planning being the next one, 3 metrics in that area, very much ensuring that there's depth for succession across the organization. key to sustainability of the business model, of course. This is critical. And finally, workforce availability. What is the contingent of workforce we've got, full-time, part-time? And finally, the last measure in that category is in absenteeism rates. So as you can see, there's a wealth of measurements contained here that not only help organizations move towards good practices or leading practices in measurement, but very much aligned with where the world seems to be going from an oversight and regulatory point of view. Next one, please. Just to reiterate what, again, some of the earlier speakers have said and what it says in the chart that I showed, there are suggestions in 30414 for both internal and external reporting. And one thing that was so important and remains so important is that there are different needs for large and smaller organizations. So we don't have a one size fits all. We actually suggested in the metrics that certain metrics should be used for both large and small organizations, but certain will be more applicable to larger organizations than smaller ones. It's very broad. Obviously, it covers the core leading practice approach. How ISO works, I think Oliver talked about this. One of the very important things to recognize is these standards are created not only by volunteers, but by people who are doing this work on a day-to-day basis. So these are not only academics, but practitioners, people working in the HR industry, who are one of the speakers mentioned the head of the tip of the arrow, the tip of the activity. So hopefully these clearly represent where the world is going. Sorry, I lost. Thank you. Obviously, doesn't need to be said, I don't think, that the metrics in here need to be ultimately determined by each organization's own strategy. But given that HR is such a critical part of strategy, there obviously needs to be not only strategic planning for HR management, but the metrics to support how are we doing against that. So what we see in here is a combination of process, activity, and outcome measures. So I think that is probably my last one, is it?
Yeah.
Yep. So thank you very much for your interest and attention. Again, watch what this group is doing, because I think we're heading in a very interesting direction of trying to bring together where the world is going, which is being represented very much by the regulatory areas, although that's a bit of a lagging area in some cases, and what's actually going on in organizations. So I think this is a great group to work with and sort of watch this space. Thanks very much, Zahid, and thank you, group.